Hey there, it's Rob Knight. I've got a tutorial for you today that's going to start in Lightroom. I'm going to use the photo merge feature in Lightroom to create a high dynamic range image. Then I'm going to take that image into Photoshop and I'm going to use layers to basically solve some color problems in the image. So if you're not familiar with working between Lightroom and Photoshop, a technique like this can be a really easy introduction into layers and layer masks. So here we are in the library module in Lightroom. And I have 5 images that I made of my living room. Okay, and I just used manual exposure mode in the camera, and I took 5 different exposures from this shot that is basically exposed for the outside. And as I increase the exposure, I get a little more information inside, all the way up to basically almost a completely blown out image, because I want to have enough detail in all these little shadow areas to make the high dynamic range image. Press G to go back to the grid view there, and I'm going to hold the shift key. I'm going to click on the first image and then shift click on the last image to select all 5 images at once. Then I'm going to right click on one of the images and go to Photo Merge HDR. When the Merge to HDR dialog opens, by default, the auto settings box is not checked. If you don't have that, then you're basically going to see sort of an ugly version of your image. And I usually check the auto settings just so I can see how the image looks, basically. Now we're going to use the tools in the develop module to fix this up, so it doesn't really matter if it looks good or not. In this case, we don't need any de-ghosting. You may use that if you have an image where, let's say you have trees that might be blowing in the wind that would make a weird artifacts in your HDR image. So you can adjust how much Lightroom goes into that de-ghosting, so you have sharp images there instead of blurry trees or double or triple images. I like to check create a stack. That will take your final output HDR image and stack it with the original source files. When you're finished with that, you just click merge. And here we have the HDR image with the auto settings applied. I've opened this image in the develop module so you can see that a lot of the highlights and shadows and whites and blacks and exposure and everything has been adjusted by Lightroom. And as you can also see, Lightroom doesn't do a great job with the auto settings. You can see by the histogram that the shadows are clipped as well as the highlights. So what I've done is gone through and adjusted this. So this is using that same HDR file, that same photo merged HDR, which you actually get a DNG file. So it makes a high dynamic range raw image, and you have a lot of room to push and pull your exposure. You can see how much detail I've brought out in the highlights outside, how much detail I've brought in the shadow areas here where it's darker. And I'm pretty happy with this overall. The thing about this image that I'm not perfectly happy with is the color, specifically the white balance. You've got so much going on with the white balance in an image like this that you have to go in and fix it manually. And this is a problem anytime I shoot architecture. It's going to be an issue because the color of the light coming from outside is going to be more blue than the color from the inside. In this case, I have a tungsten lamp here that has a nice warm glow, but that's a totally different color than the light that's coming in through the window. And as this light bounces around the room and hits different colors of paint and all sorts of different things, it changes color. You can even see that, so the blue light from outside hits the green grass and the green leaves outside and creates a green cast on the ceiling where that light reflects. You've got all sorts of different colors happening in this scene, so we've got to do something to fix that. In the past, I've gone through with the adjustment brush in Lightroom and painted in different areas and tried to adjust the white balance that way, and that works fine. You can do that with several different brushes and paint that in. But what I've found is the sort of quickest and easiest way is using layers in Photoshop. And when you're doing this, when I'm doing this for a client, I want it done right, but I want it done the quickest and easiest way because that just equates to more money. That equates to a higher price per hour if you can do the job faster, right? Especially if you're getting as good results. So here we go. I'm going to make several different copies of this image using virtual copies. Now, a virtual copy is basically a second set of instructions using the same original file. Okay, so Lightroom is a database, and when you're making changes inside of Lightroom, you're basically saving instructions in the database as to what Lightroom is going to do with that original image. When you make a virtual copy, you're going to start over with another set of instructions. So you're not going to copy the file. You're not making another copy of the original. You're not harming the original. And it's a really great way to work with different versions of the same file. So what we're going to do in this case, I have already made this particular file with a daylight white balance. Okay, so I'm going to go in and hold the Command or Control on the PC key and hit apostrophe, and that's going to create a virtual copy. Now you can tell it's a virtual copy because of the little page curl icon here. It's basically at this point exactly the same as the original. If I go back to the original and then to the virtual copy, they're the same file. But what I'm going to do is choose the white balance eyedropper here in the basic panel. And I'm going to click on this green patch. I know my ceiling is white. It's supposed to be white. Right now it looks very green in this picture. So I'm going to click here to set the white balance so that the ceiling looks correct. Okay. Now you can tell a lot of the image looks very blue now. It looks very purple. So that's not right, but that's not what I'm worried about. I'm specifically choosing the white balance for that area. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to hold the Command key or the Control key and hit apostrophe to create another virtual copy. Now I'm going to click on this white banister here in the back because this color is not quite right. It's over in the shadows. It's getting a lot of reflected light on it, and that color doesn't look quite right. So I'm going to click there to choose the white balance for that area. Now, guess what I'm going to do now? Well, I'm going to hold the Command key or the Control key and the apostrophe and create another virtual copy. And you can see what I'm doing now is basically setting a virtual copy for each different area that I want to adjust the white balance for. So I'm going to go over here to these white bricks and click here, and you can see that that changes the color quite a bit. Now I'm going to do one more just sort of security white balance here. I'm going to create another layer, hold the Command key or the Control key and the apostrophe, create another virtual copy, and then I'm going to click on my rug down here, and this is a little bit warmer, but I want that saved as a color that I can use when I'm blending these exposures. And that brings us to the Photoshop part of our tutorial. So I'm going to take all these virtual copies down here. You can see I have the four little thumbnails with the page curl. I'm going to click on the last one, and then I'm going to click on our first HDR image, our original. I'm going to hold the Shift key to select them all. Then I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to Edit In, and then all the way down at the bottom, Open as Layers in Photoshop. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and our original file as well as our four virtual copies are each on their own layer in the Layers panel. Now, they're all named the same thing since they are virtual copies of the same original. So the first thing I'm going to do is name them so I can tell what in the world that I'm doing with these. They are in a stack in the reverse order that they were in Lightroom. In other words, the bottom image is the farthest left in the film strip to the top image, which is the farthest right in the film strip. So if you remember, I'm going to double click here, and this is the one that we did the white balance for the rug. I'm going to do the next one for the bricks. And all I'm doing is double clicking on the name, and then I can change it. So this one was for the post, and then this for the ceiling. And this was our regular daylight balanced. Okay. So now we're set up to work. So basically what I'm going to do is set up each layer so that I can just paint in the color in that layer where I want it. So as far as the rug goes, I'm going to click to select that layer. I'm going to go to the bottom here and hold the Option key and create a layer mask. And holding the Option key creates a filled layer mask. So you can see that that layer basically went away because it's all being hidden by this mask. So I'm going to go choose the brush tool, and white paint, and I'm going to paint on this mask. So wherever I paint, white is going to show that layer through. I'm going to use an opacity of 50% and 100% flow, and I'm going to increase the size of my brush a little bit and basically paint in that area. And you can see the warm color coming back into the rug. I'm also going to get the floor here, and you can see that warm color. So I do an opacity of 50% so that I can go back and add a little bit more where I want it. If I don't want that entire color to show through, I don't have to do that. I can really adjust that and paint it in. Okay, so that's easy enough, right? That's the basics of layer masks and layers in Photoshop. You have a layer and you use a mask so you can show or hide whatever part of that layer you want. So as I turn on the visibility here, you can see, watch the rug there. It's blue, and now it's nice and warm and more like the actual color. Okay, so then I'm going to go to the next layer, to the bricks layer, and I'm going to hold the Option or the Alt key and click to create a filled layer mask. The same thing, I've already got my brush and my white paint, and I'm going to click and paint in the color that I want in the area of the bricks. Okay, and you can see one pass didn't really do the job, so I'm going to click and paint again to put more white paint on there and show more of that layer. Okay, and I'll turn that off and on so you can see the difference that makes. It takes that green cast out of the bricks. I'm actually going to go in here a little bit more and do some here as well. And then I'm going to do that down the list. On the post layer, this post and the color here represents this whole area of the image. So this is pretty important. I've got that layer selected. I hold my Option key and click to add a filled layer mask. In this case, I'm going to use a little bit bigger brush because, again, I'm doing a whole big section of the room here. So you can tell a huge difference that makes in this area. And if I decide that I've got that color a little bit more, or I want to take it back some, no problem. I can switch to black paint and paint black on that mask, and you can see that hides it again. So with the ceiling, I wanted to bring that back because we've actually got a specific layer just for the color in the ceiling. I'm going to switch back to white and paint that in a little bit more. And there we go. Now for the ceiling layer, I'm going to do the same thing. Option click to create a filled layer. Paint with white paint to bring that in. This makes a huge difference. You can see what a really powerful green cast has been created on the ceiling just from the light bouncing off of the green foliage outside. Okay, so now if we hide all of the adjustment layers, we've got all these different crazy colors, and then we bring them all back and it's nice and balanced, right? And the beauty of working in the CC environment, or the Creative Cloud environment with Photoshop and Lightroom, is all I have to do is hold the Command or Control S to save this image, okay? It's not only going to save my Photoshop file, but it's going to send it back to Lightroom and put it exactly where the original files were. And here we are back in Lightroom. Here's our Photoshop document saved in exactly the same place as our original files. We can use the tools in the Develop module to do little fine tuning, a little last minute adjustments. We can use gradients and the adjustment brush and anything just like we would on a RAW file or a JPEG. And even though that seems like a lot of steps, you can see through the tutorial, even when I'm talking about it and going through everything in great detail, it still took less than 10 minutes to take these 5 virtual copies and blend the color. And in my experience, it's such a faster way to work and to even out the colors in a shot like this. So I hope this is helpful. Check out robknightphotography.com, and please email me any questions at rob@robknightphotography, and let's see what you do. Show me your images. If you want to send me some shots, if you have trouble with your architectural shots, with your color, with your HDR, let me know. I'll do what I can. Thanks.